we were doing the BIODIV-AFREID project. As you can see, the title, should we worry about biodiversity and its link with emerging infectious diseases? It was interesting to see that this session was called the COVID-linked projects, because originally we were not COVID-linked at all. We started in early 2020, so COVID had not yet started. We had coronaviruses in the project already, but it was certainly not the main topic. We focused in BIODIV-AFREID on biodiversity in Africa. You see the different groups there. We actually had two partners as subcontractors in Africa, in Ivory Coast and in Congo. And so what we basically were trying to do, and I think I can move the slides. Yes. So the purpose of the objectives of the project were to see how biodiversity conditions would favor or disfavor the spillover of infectious agents into human populations. And for that, we wanted to see whether there was a link in biodiversity, in the changes in communities of small mammals, and we focused on rodents, shrews, and bats, in areas where there was more or less influence of humans, and whether that was linked then to the pathogens that were carried by these small mammals. And originally we focused mostly on Mpox and on Ebola, because these were clearly emerging infectious diseases that created a lot of interest. And we did that in different places in the DRC, in Congo, and also in Ivory Coast. We did a lot of field work, was very intensive field work in this project, where we tried to describe the biodiversity based on trappings that we did of bats and small mammals, but also acoustic biodiversity. We also looked at eDNA in different ways. And so we tried to describe the biodiversity. We collected the small mammals also for taking samples, all under very high biosecurity and biosafety conditions, because we were working in areas where before there had been Ebola outbreaks. And as you can see here on this background here, there are places in Africa where around villages there's a lot of change in the landscape because of the cutting off of forest and changing the forest into agricultural land. And so that's what we tried to investigate, whether there were differences. And we were thinking about biodiversity in the way that you see on this small graph here, that as biodiversity on the x-axis is decreasing, you would get probably a higher risk of disease emergence until biodiversity is so low that there is hardly anything left. And then, of course, there is no more risk for disease emergence. So that's what we tried to look at. The results are quite a lot of results, and we are actually still working on it. It's work in progress. What I'm showing here is just from one area where we worked, where on the left hand you see the diversity of the bats, and on the right hand you see the diversity of the terrestrial small mammals in the different habitats around a village. And as you can see, for the bats, there is not that much change in the number, in the different species of bats, but there is quite a change in the proportional presence of the different species. On the right-hand side, you can see that for the terrestrial small mammals, there is quite a big difference. And actually, the largest biodiversity there is what we see in the intermediate areas, not so much in the primary undisturbed forest, not so much in the village, but in those areas in between, which is not the case for the bats. And of course, these bats, they are much more mobile. We also looked at so-called bushmeat, which is a term we rather not use. So it's wild animals that are hunted by local communities for food. And we also included them in the study. Then we also looked at the pathogens that we could find in those different samples. And there we found a large diversity, very large diversity in some of the bats in several groups of viruses, which creates, of course, some concern. So what do we do as far as societal impact? is concerned, we had a lot of exchanges with local communities and the places where we worked. We also worked, of course, together with the local scientists, which was quite important in giving them also an uplift in their reputation in the country so that people listen more to them. We had discussions with local authorities. We also had a large biodiversity conference in Kisangani where we could actually stress these issues linked to health. And we also made several videos. So with that, I think I've very, very quickly shown this very large project, of which we still have some ongoing work to do on the analysis and on the outreach. Thank you.